Welcome to 90 minutes of Fortrain. No, 30 minutes of Cold Bowl. 60 minutes of unscripted .NET entertainment. As doctors of .NET, we prescribe healthy choices in .NET. I should really see my doctor. I'm your host, David Pine, with co-hosts Cam Sopa and Scott Addy. I'd like to welcome our good friend, esteemed colleague, and our special guest for today, Sam Basu. Sam, say hello to the world.
Hello, world. Hello, internet, and hello, good friends.
So, give the world an introduction. Who are you? Where are you coming from? What are you all about?
Yeah, well, I'm getting old, just like you. Not as old as you are, but yeah. So I'm a developer advocate at Progress Software, mostly focused on .NET, and developers may know us for the things we make. That's Telerik and Kende UI and Fiddler and all that goodness to make developers successful. I come from a long developer background. You're going to see me say this multiple times. I'm old. So yeah, lots of desktop, lots of mobile, a little bit of web all along. So here I am.
Awesome. Hey, I just wanted to say thank you. I know that Scott and I were special guests at an event that you run that's a pretty big deal called DevReach over in Sofia, Bulgaria. Can you tell the world about that a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So our engineering headquarters are in Europe. So every year we host a pretty big developer conference. We get about 1,000 to 1,500 or so people. And it's a lot of fun. We do it over like 2 days, and we bring speakers from all over the world. And it's polyglot, so .NET, JavaScript, testing, everything is welcome. But yeah, this year has been interesting for everyone. So hopefully those of you watching, you're being safe. You take care of yourself and your families. But this year, we actually just had DevReach last week. It was all week long, which is like some of the advantages of being remote. You can pull in speakers across time zones, and you can go all week long. So yeah, my camera pretty much stays on all day. Yeah, I'm a live streamer. We love being on the internet.
I just posted a link there for all of our followers and watchers today. We're showing off Telerik.com DevReach. Check it out. It's a great thing. So why don't we jump over into our checkup, the doc checkup. Hey.
Let's do a quick audio check. How am I sounding?
Not terrible.
Like you're in a vacuum cleaner.
Okay. Let me pose the question this way. Does it sound better than pre-cloud Pine?
Way better.
Okay. Good. Okay. So for today's checkup segment, we have a doc that focuses on using the experimental, and I'll stress experimental, mobile Blazor bindings. So if you are a developer interested in, building your first application that uses these experimental bindings, this is the doc you should check out. And what we're going to focus on in this particular doc is building native and hybrid mobile apps using C# syntax and, of course, .NET, no surprise, for platforms such as Android, iOS, Windows, Mac OS. The beauty here is you're using familiar web programming paradigms that you're familiar with if you're a web developer such as myself, or such as David Pine 7, who is not on the stream today. Again, I don't know if I've said this. I have, but I want to sound like a broken record here. This is experimental tech. If you're interested in using this, the prereqs are .NET Core 3.1, the SDK for that, or later, as well as Visual Studio or Visual Studio for Mac, with the following workloads. There's actually two of them: mobile development with .NET and ASP.NET and web development. Once you have those prereqs installed, you can then proceed with installing the mobile Blazor bindings project template by simply running a .NET new command. So again, that's our checkup doc. Definitely check it out. Any comments from anybody?
So I have a question. So is the intention here to design PWAs that look native? Is that like the idea here?
Do you want me to chime in?
I'll toss that over to the. Go ahead.
So we will actually talk all about this. So if you folks just want to hang in, I see questions in the chat room about the style of coding. Yes, we're going to dive into all of this, Cam. Yeah.
Oh, great.
Thank you for your question, Shavandra. It's very much appreciated.
And so if David Pine 97 has caught his breath, I think we could move on to the hallway track.
I did. I feel much better, much better. Thank you for that. We can go on to the, you said, what track are we doing now? I'm trying really hard not to break character. You got to appreciate the effort. It's a 60 minutes, apparently, of entertainment. So, in the hallway track, what we do here is, besides busting hips, we talk about backflips in the tech community. We've got Sam here who's going to tell us all kinds of cool things that we can learn from him.
Well, I'll try. But let me... Okay, so this is the segment where we are in the hallway, and you're old, probably you're not welcome here, but the rest of us get to hang out and talk about cool tech, right? So let's dive in for the topic of I suppose today. But I did want to start with a question. If you all three, if you want to come back on screen, so I know about Scott and David, but Cam, what's your background like? Are you all web as well?
I live mostly in the web backend, cloud stuff. I don't really like doing UI because I find that in the UI, the user is a variable that I just don't like accounting for. You know, like what kind of crazy messed up thing is the user going to do to blow up my app today? I used to work in a bank and had to do a lot of UI for like an account management system, and our QA people were wonderful at breaking it in new and wonderful ways.
Yeah, well, I mean, looks like you still come from a web background, so which is exactly what I was afraid of. So it's people like you that's making older folks like us look uncool, right? And maybe David will sympathize here, right? So, like, for years and years, we have been trying to sell the web guys, the hardcore web guys, on native apps, on Xaml. And apparently no one's buying, so we have to come down and speak your language. So let's do that. So I think the thing here is, like, if we look into our desktop, right, Mac or Windows, Linux maybe is in a different realm by itself. But your desktop, and then if you look down into your phone, like, majority of the apps we use are native apps, right? You can write them in multiple ways. You can absolutely use web technologies to write native apps, but they are native, right? So if you can use web stuff that you're using today to build web applications, just bring it over to native, and we can speak your language, right? That's the whole point. So let's start. Do you folks want to bring up my screen? Let's see.
There you are. Hey, that's a nice car.
Yeah, not my car. It's actually Iron Man's car. This is the Audi e-tron all-electric super sedan coming out next week, or not next week, next year.
I remember seeing Iron Man like 90 years ago. It was beautiful.
Okay, so let's talk about native and web and where the interplay lies, and the three of you feel free to chime in on where you see things. So first up, let's talk about Xamarin. Okay, so this is a tech stack that I spend a lot of time in. I'm very fond of it, as are many thousands of developers. I know the folks, the engineering team, and the PMs on that team very well. And it started out as an approach to write .NET across iOS, Android, and other platforms. And a lot of engineering has gone into it. The tools were a little rough, and now we have evolved a lot. And this is the easiest way for right now. I mean, there are a few options. I mean, there's Uno platform, there's Flutter. But if you want to write like pure .NET, this is the easiest way for you to take your apps to iOS or Android or other platforms like Tizen and so on. But I understand that not everybody wants to write XAML, because this is the more prominent way of writing the UI, the visual tree in XAML. Do they an app with Xamarin? I'm not sure if I understand the question in your chat room, but yeah, there are many apps written with Xamarin in the stores all across. So if we are to open up the funnel and invite other people, we don't realize, David, that once we get old, we like our walled gardens. We like tools that work, and we like our rich ecosystem, which is what we have with C# and Visual Studio and XAML, but it's not for everybody. So we are trying to, and Microsoft and everybody else is trying to invite other folks, especially the web folks, to come over and join us to write native apps. So this is what you have today. But then you mentioned the Blazor experimental binding. So let's talk about two different things. So we already obviously have Blazor, which is making a lot of noise because it is very exciting. So this is Blazor. This is C# for writing a modern web framework for writing modern web applications. But it doesn't need to be just on the web, as we'll see. Like it definitely has a play on desktop and on mobile. And then we'll also talk about, I think I have it bookmarked here. We'll also talk about .NET MAUI. Ooh, this is not fun. Yeah.
Remind me later. Yeah, that's what I would do. I was going to ask real quick, Xamarin, that sounds like a prescription drug. And then you mentioned Blazor, so I thought you were making fun of my Blazor here.
Yeah, no. Xamarin does sound like a prescription drug, and it is prescribed for people like me who don't want to learn iOS or Android. So it can get you around most of the way without knowing the native stack. Now, in reality, you do need to know a little bit about the platforms that you are catering to, and Xamarin doesn't get in the way. So at any time, you can render things that are native for iOS or Android, for Tizen, and so on.
I haven't seen Shop in about 12 to 15 years. My eyes have gone on me.
I hear you.
Oh, it took us how long? 12 minutes to get to the C# joke?
Yeah. Well, you're going to see a lot of C# because C# is, as we're realizing, it's actually very good in terms of defining the UI, not just your business logic. So we're going to talk about two different things, and this kind of brings into the patterns that we use to write our apps. Something that we do a lot with XAML and C# in Xamarin Forms is a pattern called Mvvm, model view model. And not everybody apparently is a fan of that, and we recognize that, right? So we have to be open and inclusive to all types of devs.
Hey Sam,
yeah.
Let me ask you a real quick question about Mvvm.
Yeah.
As someone who's pretty familiar with MVC, I like I said, I avoid UI studiously, right? What's the 30-second pitch? What's the difference between MVC and Mvvm?
It's just in the plumbing and in how the separation works. So Mvvm is model, view model, and I'm glad you brought it up. So we'll actually look into some code that shows you a little bit of Mvvm and then how we flip it to being MVU. And I'm sorry if you're hearing my kid coming back from school. It's our reality. So a model is our business object. It's our link to the objects that we're working with. It's however you're pulling in your data. Your view is meant to be very thin as much as possible, and it's not supposed to know a whole lot about other views. This is where the separation comes in. And the view model is the connection. It's the orchestrator that takes in stuff from the model, passes it on to the view, and vice versa. And there's two-way data binding. And if you do this right, much of it is actually built into Xamarin Forms, and then you can bring in frameworks, Mvvm frameworks that help you out, the boilerplate code. What it comes down to is your views should be as thin as possible, so they're easily testable. your view models should not know much about the models, and you need to have some patterns in place, like repositories or maybe how you inject things. So all of those things are taken care of in some of the bigger frameworks. But compared to like MVC, it's just a different way of doing things. It's not like drastically different. It's just one more layer in between. So the controller in MVC is kind of what we use as a view model.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's just something very popular in with Xamarin devs, with anybody who does XAML. Like, so David, to your point, like I've been doing XAML and WPF for like 50 years now, so we're in the same boat. Old tech is good because it runs your business. It doesn't need to die.
I lost you at DevReach.
You're lagging quite a bit behind. We'll try to catch you up. So anyway. Yeah.
So Sam, let me ask a follow-up question to what we were just talking about. So you gave us a walkthrough of MVVM. It's sounding to me like if I decide to go the MVVM route, I am essentially forced to use XAML for the markup.
In a way.
Is that correct?
MVVM doesn't, I mean, it's a design pattern. It doesn't have anything to do with a specific tech, but MVVM is most commonly used if you have a XAML and C# code base. So like for WPF, for UWP, for Silverlight, David, you might remember Silverlight. So for all of those XAML code bases, it's just a very natural framework to use to have that separation of concern. So for Xamarin Forms, yes, if you're doing XAML, MVVM, I mean, MVVM doesn't force you to do XAML. It's kind of the other way around. Like if you are doing XAML, you are most likely going to use MVVM.
Silverlight. I remember that one. Yeah.
That thing is still around. There is an end date inside, though. It's October 12th, I think, next year. So, and then there are lots of migration paths. You don't have to rewrite the whole thing. There are lots of ways we can reuse code, but that's a whole other conversation. Okay, so we're going to talk about two techs here today, Blazor, and there's this UI framework called Comet, which we'll talk about. This has implications for .NET MAUI. So let's talk about this, and both of them actually end up using a slightly different pattern called MVU, Model View Update Pattern. So let's begin with Blazor first, and then we'll come to Comet. So Blazor, as most of you most likely know, this is coming from the ASP.NET world, the minds of Steve Sanderson, Dan Roth, and lots of other engineers who are very smart. This is great. If you know about Blazor, if you follow Blazor, what we started out using Blazor for was server-side first. So we had a DOM that we used to update over a real-time signal our bridge, and things were great. And then starting this May, we actually have full-on WebAssembly. I know Chatroom was asking about WebAssembly. Don't do Web COBOL. I've done COBOL a couple of days, or not a couple of years. COBOL can be fun, but we're better off doing other modern stuff. So WebAssembly is running C# straight up in your browser, just like how your JavaScript engines will run your JavaScript. That's the same way WebAssembly code is compiled down and run natively by the browser, and performance is great. So this is where Blazor is. And when you target, like I think Cam, you had brought this up. When you,
we got a question real quick here from Ravindra. He's asking, does Blazor support client-side integrations, such as the barcode scanners and biometrics? I'm assuming camera stuff, things like that.
Yes. So yes and no. You are running inside of a web shell. So your web application needs to ask for permissions to use the camera. So absolutely you can. But some of those things like barcodes, like that comes in the form of more richer UI controls. And you get some out of the box, but that's where the ecosystem comes in, right? That's where the community and rest of the folks who write UI tools, like ourselves, we can get you the tools to throw in some polished UI. So actually, let's dovetail, because that since I did talk about our controls really quick, and I'm going to try to answer something that Cam had brought up. So let me show you a quick demo. This is Telerik, obviously, and don't mind me using the UI. I'm just going to show you an example, and then we can move on to Visual Studio. So let's talk about Blazor, and then now we're talking about targeting mobile form factors, right? So Blazor has a play both for desktop and mobile. Actually, for desktop, you can wrap this up. Like especially if you think about WebAssembly, it's all wrapped up. All the DLLs are right there, so you could wrap this up into Electron and running it with Node.js, but it's really heavy-handed. So if you, I see the boos, but if you can not do it, please don't. There are lightweight versions of doing a web renderer. So yeah, but Blazor can play for desktop, and Blazor can absolutely play for the mobile form factor as well. This little demo that I'm going to pull up here, this is actually a PWA, so you can see that it comes up as a PWA, and we'll give it.
I've forgotten all of my acronyms through the years. What is PWA? What does that stand for?
So PWA is a progressive web application. This is something Google started pushing, and Microsoft is obviously all in behind it because it's all Edge and running on the Chrome. Safari and Apple, I mean, they're kind of grudgingly on board. They're not quite, because I mean, it kind of beats their whole app model, but progressive web apps are actually essentially websites, right? So, but they're mobile websites. They can be very good citizens on your mobile form factor because you can really provide a rich experience. Your users can pin your app, your mobile app, onto their home screens, and then you can have push notifications go out. You can have service workers running in the background, and you can update data and do whatever else. So it's a good experience on mobile device, but you are still using the web as your distribution medium.
So we're talking about mobile, but there was a question here I wanted to get to. It says, will Blazor replace the likes of Angular and React? You know, those are SPA technologies. Is that something we can expect?
Yes and no again. Okay, so Blazor and the Blazor team will be the first ones to tell you it's not trying to replace anything, right? It's not here to replace JavaScript. It's to give you one more option. Blazor is C# .NET running in the browser, just like JavaScript does. So a lot of .NET shops who may have moved on to SPA frameworks like Angular or React or Vue, and they kind of use .NET as a web API backend. You don't have to do that anymore. Now you can do C# front and back. But if you are okay writing JavaScript or writing TypeScript, then keep rolling with your SPA frameworks, the JavaScript frameworks. Nothing wrong in it. And in fact, there is I think I had it up here somewhere. Yeah, there is a JavaScript interrupt. So your JavaScript doesn't need to be thrown completely out of the window. It can talk to .NET. It's not the cleanest thing, and this is being worked on. But yeah, absolutely, they can coexist. So going back to PWAs, so now you're talking about bringing in the web love through PWA, progressive web app, into your phone. And you will see like this is running as a web app, but I mean, I get the install prompts, and I mean, this is totally responsive. Now, in terms of like what a PWA is, like this is nothing like radical out of the blue. So you can use things like what is it called? The PWA builder. So you can absolutely bring in your service workers. So you can write JavaScript, and all that Blazor is doing here is running the component model, letting you render the UI through Blazor, and it's all running on the client side. So yeah.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
What is JavaScript? I never heard of it.
Well, it's the thing you likely have turned off in your browser. So you are using a good version of the internet. Keep on doing it. Yeah. So Cam, I don't know if I responded to your question in the past. Like PWA definitely is a play with Blazor, but it is a play where you're only writing stuff that is to be delivered through web as a distribution medium.
Real quick, we are seeing a lot of conversation in the chat around performance, Blazor versus JavaScript. One thing I'll add here is, so there's two different flavors of Blazor that you can use. There's what we call Blazor Server, and then there's Blazor WebAssembly. Because WebAssembly is being used for Blazor WebAssembly, you're going to see near native performance. Therefore, it should outperform JavaScript. Of course, your mileage will vary. Benchmark test everything. But just keep in mind, WebAssembly is being used under the covers, so your performance should be pretty darn good.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so this was PWA, but now let's switch screens to what, or switch focus to what Scott had brought up initially, and that is mobile Blazor bindings. And David, I'm old like you, so this is definitely not the web. This is me. I'm just not a big fan of dark mode. So if this is blinding anybody, please let me know, and I can switch to dark mode.
That's perfect for me here. I'm just going to chime in and yell at my screen. I can see it. I can hear you loud and clear.
There you
Perfect.
go.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. So what is Blazor bindings? Okay, so this is an attempt by a couple of smart people, and this gentleman in particular, Elon. This is an attempt to invite web folks to write native Xamarin apps. Right? What it is, it's just a UI play. It is absolutely running on top of Mono and on top of Xamarin, just the way we write Xamarin Forms apps. Except the three of you don't have to write XAML, and I cannot. I would not have to drag you kicking and screaming into XAML land. You get to stay with your web stuff, right? You get to write pure Blazor stuff, just like what you see here. And under the covers, it essentially is running the the Blazor component model, which is actually similar to React, but it's rendering Xamarin Forms UI, native iOS, native Android UI. It's only a UI play, so that you get to write Blazor for your UI visual tree. Does it make sense?
Yes, that makes sense.
Yeah, and this has no WebAssembly play. This is just pure Blazor component model running on top of Xamarin Forms. Okay, so go ahead and search for this if you're interested. It is experimental, like Scott said many times, but it's so much fun to kind of play around with. You can see some of the things like how you get started. You need .NET Core 3.1, works on Visual Studio for Windows or Mac. The project templates, they're still CLI only, but you can imagine like they can be file new project in Visual Studio. They have a couple of walkthroughs, to-do app, a weather app, and they talk about some of the user interfaces. If you look at the component model, I think they have a list here. So these are all visual components. Like these are stacking things. These are container controls. Some of them are actual view controls. So you get about 30 or so controls that are pure Xamarin Forms, but they are wrapped up inside of a Blazor view, essentially. So you get to write Blazor, and they render corresponding native UI for each platform. And you get to style things with CSS. So this is good, right? Let's take a look at an example here.
I'm curious if people who are watching really appreciate the ability to use CSS cascading style sheets within a mobile experience. Is that something you like? Yes or no?
In fact, this was met with a lot of pushback, but you can actually style XAML, which is my old school language, with CSS. It's just not a lot of people do that, but it's an option. Okay, so let me bring up a couple of things and show you the difference. So this is essentially what you get with Xamarin Forms. I'm starting with the XAML, so don't get scared. I will go talk Blazor in just a second. But this is classic Xamarin Forms. You get a .NET standard library, which is shared across all the platforms that you're supporting. And then for each platform, you get a project. This is actually morphing a little bit with .NET MAUI, which we'll talk about. That's essentially the evolution of Xamarin Forms. But for now, this is XAML and C#. This is a classic Xamarin Forms project. So let's do a Hello World app, which for mobile apps ends up being a lot of times like a list of things. And like a Hello World is bringing down something from the cloud and showing it. So here's my Hello World. So I am using a RESTful endpoint here. So if I pull this up, this endpoint is actually a nice place to kind of try things. I don't know if you use it. There are lots of other options like this, but this one gives you like a list of posts and comments. When you go to posts, like essentially it gives you Latin. It's about 100 or so posts, and each post has like a certain JSON body. So with that, that's the endpoint. And let's take a look at some code here. This is how Xamarin Forms applications load up in XAML world. You get on start, sleep, and resume. These are lifetime events for the app. and then you get main page, which is the starting page of your app. Then I have some code here. This one essentially is just, let me bump up my fonts a little bit. This is essentially an object that represents what I'm getting down from the cloud, so title and body and so on. And then I have a little bit of code here, which is using an HTTP client. It's actually making a get async request to that endpoint, bringing that JSON back down, deserializing it back into an object model. And then we have a thing called observable collection, which is a C# generic, but it's a smart one. So we can do data binding, two-way data binding, and it's beautiful. Yeah, thank you for posting the link there. So that's my data. And then this is kind of classic XAML, okay? And this is where it gets a little verbose and people are not fond of it. I get that, which is why we are bringing in other ways of doing this. So this is XAML. Essentially, it's not much once you get used to it. It gets a little verbose when you have behaviors and lots of UI interactions in the XAML itself. But essentially, this is my content, which is my placeholder. And then I have stack layouts. I have a list view here, which is going to show me a list of all of the posts. And inside of it is a template. And I'm binding it to the title properties. I just want to show the title of each of the posts that are coming back.
Am I the only one who sees web forms when they see XAML?
No, you're not, because that's kind of how things started. Like if you go back to like web forms and the first initial versions of WPF, this is where we were, like drag and drop, and it kind of looks like markup that is that like the platform understands, but I mean, it's XML essentially, and yeah, so it has the roots into where like Microsoft developers started writing web apps for the first time.
Right.
Well, I wanted to call attention to something real quick. In your service before, you had an observable collection that's based on the observer pattern, and actually, ironically, just last week we had our good friend Rodney Littles on, who did a full episode on reactive UI. So yeah, make sure you check that out as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, and then this is something XAML developers use a lot for data binding. It's just nice. So if anything, the UI changes in the object model, your object set doesn't need to change, and vice versa. So that's my XAML. And then in the code behind, all we are doing is when the page is being drawn, we actually go and request a collection of posts, and we bind that to the item source property of my list view, so I can show you the list. And that's it. I mean, there's a filtering thing, but that's not important.
What? Hey, what? Can you hover over this there in the editor? What is this, you kids? I swear. I swear to God.
This is not your JavaScript. It's not as confusing. This essentially means the parent of the visual tree that you're sitting on. So yeah, don't cut yourself off.
This. Okay. I'm with you now. I'm just making sure these whippersnappers are doing it right.
Yep. This is essentially the view that you're on. Exactly. So let me go ahead and run this. I am with you, Dave. I'm not as cool. I don't have an iPhone 12 yet, so I'm going to stick to my iPhone 11 Pro for my simulator. And it's going to take a second to come up. So what you see here, this is kind of hello world for Xamarin Forms, right? So you have a search box, and then you can scroll down, right? This is a list of 100 posts that we get back from the web, right? So everything works. This is XAML. Now let's look at the same exact example, but in a slightly different way. So let's close this, and we're going to bring up, let's see where, Blazor. So in here, you're going to see a few things that are different. First up, let's look at the project structure here. So like I said, a Blazor mobile project is essentially a Xamarin Forms project. Nothing really different about it. So you will, I'm not a big fan of Android, as you can very much tell. Like I'm on iOS. I do build for Android, but just not in my everyday work. So I have iOS projects, and this one is my .NET Standard library. But in here, what is different is in your dependencies, if you look at it, it is still using Xamarin Forms. So we are absolutely running on Xamarin Forms on Mono. Yeah.
I have another question, Sam, and it caught my attention here, but on your screen, it looks like you might have a typo on line 12. What's the red squiggly for?
It is Visual Studio complaining that what you're using is too new, and I don't know how to deal with it.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. I said, you kids. Yeah,
you kids are using bleeding edge stuff, and Visual Studio is like, yeah, I don't know.
Actually, Sam, that leads me to a second question. So I've never done development on a Mac at all, and you're using Visual Studio for Mac. This is like my first time I've ever actually seen someone like actually use it.
Yeah.
Can you do all this stuff with Visual Studio Code too?
That's a very interesting question. The answer is yes and no. So Xamarin Forms, you cannot do on Visual Studio Code because the build system is still MS Build, and some of the way the simulators are hooked up, you cannot fire them up from Visual Studio yet, but it's coming. It's actually coming in .NET MAUI, and I'll show you Comet in just a bit. That actually you can work with VS Code because it's using .NET builds.
Okay.
All right, we are right about 34 minutes out. So let me churn through and show you some more stuff. So as you can see, like Xamarin Essentials, this is the NuGet package that we use to get you the API access to each platform, iOS or Android. So for camera, geolocation, you don't have to use Java or Objective-C or Swift. You can just write C#. So it is still using all of that. But then this is the Blazor bindings NuGet package. That's the preview bit. So if you do CLI .NET new Blazor bindings, this is the project that it'll spit out. And essentially, it just includes the NuGet, or you can just start with the Xamarin Forms project and you can just bring in that NuGet package. That's it. But beyond that, things start changing. So here we have an imports razor, which is kind of what you would be doing if you're doing straight up Blazor, right? And we are bringing in those namespaces. We are bringing in Xamarin Forms. App.cs also looks different. Now, it still has the on, start, sleep, and resume. This is not for you to go to sleep, David. This is for the app when it goes to sleep, when it's in the background. And this
I was dozing off. I'm sorry.
and the resume is when the app comes back out into the foreground, and start is obviously start. Quick case in point, iOS and Android will actually not notify you if your app is just killed by the OS, like the user hasn't used it in days, and it's just like sitting there chewing through memory. You do not get notified when your app is killed. So please, please, please save your state on sleep. So what is different here is this is going to make all of you very happy, because this is essentially the ASP.NET way of newing up things and the whole DI pipeline and your services and your all of your components brought together. So this is replacing what Xamarin Forms does slightly. And there are strong suggestions from the community that Xamarin Forms also do things this way. I don't care really either way. But here we are adding a new component called Hello World, and that's about it. So here, this is Hello World, and notice it's all Razor here, okay? So this is web stuff, but this is where we need to kind of invite you a little bit to know what exactly you're doing. Some of these things, content view and stack layout, they're artifacts of the XAML world, because that is your visual tree that you're painting. So you may need to know a little bit about some of these UI controls, and all of them are documented, like in this thing that I was showing you. It's all documented right up here. So if you go through this, they will tell you exactly how to use these things. But so it reads a little bit like XAML, but it is still Blazor. Because what we are doing here is I have the same like class that represents the objects, and I'm bringing back data from the cloud. But then let me see. Yeah, this is where I'm going fetching data from the cloud, and then I'm binding it. But there is a thing here called the post list razor, which is essentially one component. So think about components now, web components. And this is where we get to write web components that iterate, and we can replicate any number of components that we want on the page. So this component has only one job, and that's to show you a label, which is not a very good use, but just to kind of prove a point. So this one takes in a parameter. So this is Blazor. As you can see, you can do the @code right there. And again, David, to your and my age, when we first saw this as XAML developers, we're like, no, don't do this, because it brings us back memories of web forms, like spaghetti code, markup, and code that is just like too close together. That's difficult to test. So you don't have to do this actually. But you can see, like, this is Blazor. You can write @code, everything. There is no service side here. This is all running on the device. So it's taking in one whole post object as a parameter. And then what Hello World Razor does is it steps through for each post that we got back in the list. Why don't we display that component? And we are going to set the post list to display to each post. And notice how this Razor view actually does not have a @code. And that's because in here, this is all convention driven. So please, if you can, get away from doing server-side code in there as well. You can do a .cs file, and then you can just write your code behind. So it just picks it up. So this is my razor.cs. It's just a partial class. In here, I have the same observable connection, and that's it. And I get the posts. And the binding actually happens right here in the for each. So we are rendering that post list component 100 times as we iterate over that loop and render all 100 posts. So any questions so far while I bring up this demo?
I do actually have a point of clarification I want to make. I've been chatting with Andreas in the chat room while you've been talking, Sam, and he says that he's completely new to .NET, and he's all actually hyped up now about this cross-platform development story. He was actually asking about Maui though. And if we could go back just a second, you were talking about like in Visual Studio Code, there's not a there's some question as to what happens when the interplay in the development loop with like the emulators and all that. Can you back up and talk about that just a little bit again? And he was asking, like, well, so when will I be able to write applications in Maui and in VS Code? And I have no idea.
Okay, how about we go forward? Because Blazor is one aspect of what we might see in .NET Maui. We haven't really talked about Maui yet. So
okay.
Can you give me one more minute, and then I'll actually go into .NET Maui.
Okay, sure. No, like I said, I was just trying to help our friend here in the chat room.
So yeah, hang in there, friend. We will talk about VS Code and when you can expect Maui. Absolutely. But what you see here is this is the same hello world, right? Same list of posts coming back, if I can scroll. But it's just done differently. This is done with Blazor bindings. Okay, if that makes sense. And just for closing off the Blazor loop, let me show you one more thing, because this is a question that comes up quite a bit. Like, what happens to your other Xamarin Forms controls if you are doing Blazor? And the answer is you can bring it in. It just takes a little bit of work. So let me show you that real quick. So in this one, I have this is the exact same Blazor mobile bindings project, except this one has a couple of custom controls, and this is true for any custom control that you have for iOS or Android or Xamarin Forms. In here, notice that I have a calendar and I have a numeric input control. Yeah, Blazor is amazing. Yeah, Blazor is pretty good. Everyone's talking about it, and it's easy to see why devs are excited about this. So the only thing we have to do is, if you have a Xamarin Forms control, and there is documentation on this, like if you go into advanced here, custom components like the docs here, and again, we are talking to the docs team here. This is still in the works. This has to be improved a whole lot, but there's some guidance already on how you can do that. Yeah,
if only we knew someone who could help with that.
Exactly. And if only like the community could make pull requests and help out, so we all could. But there's some help already. Like there was a couple of pancake view type Xamarin Forms components, and those have been brought over to the Blazor land. So there's some help essentially. Right now, what you have to do is for every Xamarin Forms control, you have to kind of wrap it, and you have to register that. And each property of so here's what it comes down to. This is all a wrapper, right? It's an abstraction. So every property of your Xamarin Forms control and every event handler has to be exposed out to Blazor. That's what it is. So it's a little bit of a painful, or if not painful, just a repetitive process, but it's not hard. So I have done it just like for a couple of controls here. So if I can bring this up. Just to kind of showcase, like this is again a Telerik UI, but don't read into the UI. I'm just showing you how to bring in a custom control. So we'll see this come up. Yes, I'm using a trial. Yes, so that's a calendar, and that's a stepper. Notice how I'm incrementing the stepper by 20. So that's all customizable because we opened up one property of that native control to Blazor. So then I can set in parameters using Blazor. So it's all very possible to do with Blazor. Just bring in custom components and expose them out to Blazor. That makes sense so far? So far, so good?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Now, let's talk about .NET Maui, because that's where a lot of questions are, seems like. Since Blazor has JS Interrupt, chat room, you can run your favorite. Yeah, absolutely. You can do all of your JS and CSS libraries. Absolutely. All right. So folks looking at .NET MAUI. So Xamarin Forms has been around for quite some time. And part of Xamarin Forms is Xamarin iOS or Xamarin Android, which is where you write the UI natively in iOS or Android, and you still use C# as your business logic. So the goal with .NET MAUI is to kind of bring in Xamarin more into the .NET land, so developers have more confidence going in and using Xamarin stuff. So essentially, Xamarin iOS becomes .NET for iOS, and Xamarin Android becomes .NET for Android, or that's the goal so far. This is a long runway. So this is not shipping until officially for production until November of 2021, which is, and this was announced back at Build, so you got a year and a half to get things right. You will start seeing previews of some of this right now after .NET Conf next week, I think. No, in 2 weeks. So you will start seeing previews, but essentially Xamarin Forms will be what it is. It will target iOS, Android, Windows, and Mac, and Tizen, and a few other things. The tooling gets better, the dev loop gets tighter, but we are also inviting some other things to be a part of Xamarin Forms, and Blazor most likely will be one of them, because again, it invites web devs into Xamarin Forms, and literally what we're doing is Xamarin Forms. So this is .NET MAUI. Start here. If you do a search, this is likely where you will end up. This is a post from Hunter, and Hanselman did a whole show as well. I'm reading this chat room here, Blazor architectures, but yeah, it looks like the chat room is excited about Blazor. Yeah, Blazor is all good. So a few things are improving in .NET MAUI. You have the single project experience, and the tooling gets better. But this is where we talk about those app patterns. This is Mvvm that we are being used to. The commands, the bindings, the navigation, all of that will stay. So .NET devs and XAML devs can keep on doing that. But here, we start talking about MVU a little bit, which is kind of a different play on MVC, Cam. So it's just if you're doing React or React Native in particular, if you're doing Flutter, those devs are already doing MVU. So it started with Elm, and apparently it's quite popular. So it was funny to me, the Microsoft post here actually referred to this blog post by this gentleman named Thomas Band. I think it's in Europe. If you do a search on explain MVU to me, this is one of the best posts I've come across, and I've read this multiple times. This tells you exactly what MVU is. What's a model? It's essentially a state of the application. And what's a view? It's lightweight, and somewhere down here has an image here. So this is kind of what we're doing. We have a model, and that's the state drives the UI, and then that dispatches messages. And if the user does something, you have an update loop that comes back and changes the model, which in turn drives the UI. So it is one directional flow, but it's happening in a loop. So it takes care of itself. So Microsoft pointed to this, but again, it's a design pattern. And this gentleman came back with a post to say, yeah, what you're doing is not quite MVU, but again, it's open to interpretation, right? So this is MVU. And the closest you can play around with MVU right now, if you look at the .NET MAUI repo, there's a GitHub repo. You are starting to see some of the work go in. Essentially, Xamarin Forms has this concept of renderers, which is you write a piece of C# or a XAML. And at runtime, we need to turn around and render native UI for iOS or Android. And the piece of code that does it is called a renderer. And that used to be very stuck to XAML and C#. So that's what they're opening it up, making it more of a thing that every programming model can use. So Blazor can use that, and Comet can use that. And this is kind of a playground right now. So look around on GitHub for a thing called Comet. This is by a gentleman, and a lot of people help him, but James Clancy is a very smart engineer over at the Xamarin Forms team. This kind of shows you exactly where things are headed come .NET MAUI, and this works on Visual Studio Code. In fact, this actually has, if you go all the way down, it actually has all of these heads. It can actually target Blazor back to the web. So XAML, we have been burned before. Let me go back. Talking about Silverlight, we used to love writing XAML and the tooling to light up apps on the web. Silverlight and the whole plugins model never really went anywhere. But this is kind of bringing XAML back to the web. Early days, but the promise is there. It's based on Elm. Yes, it is based on Elm, which Redux is based to. Yes, we are doing exactly the kind of state management that React will get to. But I mean, I'm showing you just the very basics here. So start with Comet, and this is a good playground to kind of play around with. So let me take you out of this and show you some Comet here. Let's do this one here first. This is kind of Hello World.
So Sam, while you were talking about Maui, you were describing this single project experience, which led me to wonder how does that complicate the publishing of the app to the various app stores if everything is in a single project? Let's say, for example, I want to take that app and only publish that to the Google Play Store. What does that look like?
No, this is actually very good. I think I closed it, but this is a bit of painful work right now. But the Xamarin team and the Visual Studio teams are promising that this will be something they take care of. So take a look at like just this part here. So right now, when we do a Xamarin Forms application, we have a per platform folder. And when you do a build for iOS, it essentially grabs your images, your splash screens, all of the assets that are local to iOS, and that's how it does the build. Same for Android. But they are saying that it will be a single cross-platform project where your fonts, your images, and everything will be embedded in it. And then you, based on which build you do, they will be careful to just pick up the artifacts or cater to just that platform. So again, I mean, none of this work has been done yet, but that's the promise. And this should make life easier for Xamarin Forms developers. Does it make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so, and again, I mean, you can see like you can have conditional things like if you're on Android, do only this versus like doing a generic for all platforms. So yeah, none of this is done yet, but I mean, that's the promise, that it's a single project. So going back to Comet here, this is the new way, and this is going to feel familiar to a lot of folks who do web stuff and React or Flutter right now. Notice how this is still using the old Xamarin Forms way, so it's for platform project. So the new project structure is not there yet. But if you look at the .NET Standard library here and the dependencies, this one actually does not have Xamarin Forms, right? This is a key difference here coming from Blazor mobile bindings, which is sitting right on top of Xamarin Forms. This one is not, because this is future-facing. This one does not want to use Xamarin Forms, but it does want to use what is powering Xamarin Forms under the covers, and that's the renderer. So it's using some of the universal renderers. It does use Xamarin Essentials to get you the API access, but otherwise it's just all Comet. So this is C#, and this is the way in which we're going to define the visual tree now. Now, keep in mind with Xamarin Forms, I mean, so many different terms, like so many different things we got, like options that we got. Even with Xamarin Forms, like Scott, you were asking, like, you don't have to write XAML, right? You can define the whole visual tree in C#. It's just like not many people do that. I know, like Brandon Minnick, who's a good friend of mine, he likes to define all of his UI in C#, but it's verbose. It's quite a bit, but he does get good IntelliSense. But this is
the IntelliSense makes it all worth it, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's all worth it.
So we do have a question for you, Sam. Again, going back to Maui, is that capable of also running on the web?
Oh boy, that's a loaded question. And yes and no. The promise is yes, it will be, but keep in mind it won't be ready until like next November, and that's a long time frame to go. If you are wanting XAML to run on the web, this is what I can point to right now. And all of this is very relatable tech. So take a look at Uno platform. This is an open source framework built by some very smart folks out of like close to me in Montreal. So they have what's called a WebAssembly playground. So try this, and you'll see XAML live in the browser. And they're using UWP XAML, which is a slightly different flavor of XAML that is considered like Windows XAML, and that works on the web. So would Maui have renderers for WebAssembly? I would assume so, yes, because we got a long way to go. But yes, we don't have it yet.
I remember playing Uno
Yes,
with my kids.
You can still do that. Yeah, just not cool, David. Not cool anymore. Get them an Xbox. Yeah, so this is different, slightly different. What time is it? Okay, we got 7 minutes to go. Until these three guys kick me out, I can keep talking. So this is where you see, like, we have a state. We have a concept of a state, which is essentially our model. And you can ask a lot of questions here, like, this is not very testable. Yes, I get all of that. But early days, we're just trying to get the UI going. So we have a state. A V stack is essentially a vertical stack. There is an H stack, which is horizontal stack. This is kind of going back to the stack layout in Xamarin Forms. There's also a Z stack, which is kind of going like inside or outside. That kind of confuses me, but just the essentials. This view, this is essentially the MVU part of it. You're defining the view, and then the update loop is kind of implicit. So in here, we have a state, and we have a value that's being shown in a text box, and then we have a button that increments the count. So again, hello world. Let's go ahead and run this. Yeah, go for it.
I was going to ask a question real quick. So state, I notice that read-only state there. You've got two using statements. One's using system and one is using Comet. Using system is actually not used. That means that state is coming from Comet. Yes. Is that correct?
So it is read-only. So you can't modify the object itself, but you can modify the value of that object. It's a pointer, and the state can. I mean, this is where like the purist versus the pragmatist view comes in. The state can be immutable. You are ideally meant to keep on stacking the states as they change throughout your application, or you can toss them out if it's hurting you in some way. But again, the purists will say it's immutable. So I can.
There was a question.
And like right here, we are updating the value of the state. So would you be able to go back to what the value of the count was? It's in memory, so technically yes. And you can, as your UI updates the state, you can save off the state in memory, or if you want something on physical media, and you can go back to the state if you wanted to. But I mean, you see what's happening here. Where did my counter go? So yeah, it's kind of going up, and it's obviously the value of this button, or the action of this button, this command is driving the value. So let's look at a slightly different view that I was building. To be honest, looks much cleaner than Flutter. Yeah, thank you. I think James and the .NET Maui folks will appreciate that comment. While I'm bringing up another one, so this kind of goes back to a library called Fabulous. So there's always been a desire to write F#. It's just functional, never quite gelled with Xamarin Forms tooling. But what you see here with Comet is actually inspired heavily from Fabulous and from F#. So here is another like bunch of states here. I'm using an H stack. This is kind of a login screen that I was trying to build. Let's run this, and you will see where the state comes in. It can be continuous, or it can also be based on some actions here.
It seems very declarative and fluent.
It is meant to be fluent, yes. And again, like coming from like a XAML background, I'm not sure if I'm completely happy with it, but again, I see that, I mean, this is an option. Like this, I don't need to be able to or want to do this if I don't care to. I mean, this is to bring the Flutter guys, this is to bring the hardcore web guys into the fold.
I like it.
Yeah. So this is a thing where you can obviously type in your name and your password. This is a cool little slider here that you can see. Like it's going from like 0 to 100, and it's going by a fraction, and it's a float. So as I change, no, hang on, I don't want the go away. Where's the keyboard is hiding it? Yeah, that's not fun. Okay, but anyways, you can see that as I move the slider. This is my braveness factor, so that obviously updates. And then when I hit this button, you can see like I clear out the username, password, and the security value here goes back to 0. So that's essentially what we're doing here. We are editing the state. Like when I hit the button, I'm just clearing out a couple of states, and it goes back to 0. And then the slider, again, it's tied to the security value. So this is like one-way data binding, but you can very quickly see that while the UI updates itself, how the rest of the app updates based on the model changing. So this is Comet, this is MVU, and it's a new way for folks to be able to build Xamarin Forms applications. This is, again, to bring in folks like you who are web developers. You want to do Blazor, you do Blazor. With mobile Blazor bindings on top of Xamarin Forms. You want to do MVU and the purest declarative C# way of defining the UI, you come and do Comet. And if you want to do XAML and C#, that stays as well. with .NET MAUI. And Cam, going back to something that you had asked with Comet, you'll see that the hot reload thing, which is like what happens when you change some code and you want to see that going, that's built in. So all you have to do in Visual Studio, actually, you just have to enable the if debug, just Comet reload, make that happen. And if you look at the getting started guide, which is somewhere here, so if you want to get started with Comet right now, you can. You just need Visual Studio Code, you need the latest version of .NET Core, and you obviously need iOS or Android if you're doing those like platform-specific builds. And then you do .NET New, CLI to get it, and then .NET New Comet, and then write the commit to get in, and then .NET Restore. And I'm forgetting, like he has a thing where there's an extension, Comet Debug extension. This will actually let you fire up the iOS and the Android simulators. I don't know if there's a documentation here, which again we can help fix. But from Visual Studio Code, you can say run on iOS simulator, run on Android simulator. And
I love it. I love it. I'm sold. We got 60 seconds left, but I wanted to ask you one final question real quick here, and this is the toughest one yet. Where does the data go, right? We showed how to show data on the screen, but once you have the data, where does it go, huh? Where do you do with the data?
It's up to you. You have an object, then it's up to you to shove it into a database or push it off to a cloud. That's all of your background services and your service architectures. But the state, again, it's in memory, and it may or may not be mutable based on how purist you are. But otherwise, you have a continuous loop to update the state of the application, and then go back and update the UI based on the model's changes.
Well done. This has been great. Thank you so much, Sam. I loved it. And hey, you kept me awake. I need a nap anyway, so I'm going to go to sleep, I think, pretty soon.
There you go. I'm glad to put you to sleep. But this is all exciting, right? So if you are a C# and a .NET dev, let me bring out here. Yeah, so if you are a C# or .NET dev now, you can look forward to a bunch of things. Where did my camera freeze?
Your camera did freeze. Oh wait, now you're now it's like making up for it. It's like showing a whole bunch of frames in a very short period of time.
Yeah, it's just catching up.
It's like my knees; they're frozen all the time.
I would just like to point out that for the past 60 minutes, I managed to hold back all of my rotary dial jokes for David Pine.
There you go.
I'm proud of myself.
Hey.
Real quick, so next week's guest, if you didn't see it scrolling across the bottom of the screen, we will have Bree from the .NET PM team who oversees our ML.NET product offering. So definitely look forward to that next week. Any closing thoughts, Sam, before we wrap this up?
No, I mean, if you are a .NET or if you're a C# developer, just keep your mind and your eyes open. A lot of things are happening, and then some of it may be a little overwhelming, but stick to what you know. And if you want to keep doing XAML, C#, you can keep doing so. If you want to do Blazor, you can keep doing it. If you want to do MVU with .NET MAUI, you can do it. So the bottom line is, like, your investment, your knowledge is good. And if you're just invested in web technologies, don't be scared to write native apps.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sam. We loved having you on.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thank you, everyone.
All right.
See you next week, everybody.
Till next time.